I want to thank the members of the Academy. I'd also like to thank every Australian actor and theatre colleague I've ever worked with.
Before he was accused, Geoffrey Rush was Australia's most celebrated actor. After the accusations, he disappeared like a ghost, vanishing from red carpets, from stages, from the very industry that once adored him. What happened in between was not a criminal charge nor a trial, but a single anonymous allegation in a newspaper that shattered a lifetime of prestige. In 2017, at the height of the global #MeToo reckoning, Geoffrey Rush's name was unexpectedly dragged into the storm. Without formal charges, without the identity of the accuser ever being revealed to the public, the headlines alone were enough. Australia's Daily Telegraph published claims that Rush had engaged in inappropriate behavior during a theatre production, vague, faceless accusations that mushroomed into a scandal. The article didn't include proof, didn't cite sources, but its ripple effect destroyed far more than just an image. It shook the foundation of a man who had built his life on the sacredness of performance and the trust of the stage. The story that followed was not just about a man and a headline. It was about what happens when reputation collides with sensationalism, when trial by media replaces justice, and when a lifetime of artistry is erased by a whisper. Geoffrey Rush did what few dare to do. He fought back. He sued for defamation, and he won. But even in victory, he lost more than the court could ever restore. This is not just a tale of fame or fall from grace. This is the haunting story of how one of Australia's most revered actors became the casualty of silence, suspicion, and a world too eager to destroy what it once praised. Geoffrey Rush was not just a star, he was an institution. Born in Toowoomba, Queensland in 1951, he emerged as a towering figure in Australian theatre long before Hollywood knew his name. A classically trained actor with deep roots in Shakespearean drama, Rush carved his reputation on the stages of Sydney and Melbourne, becoming a cornerstone of the Australian arts scene in the 1980s and 1990s. He wasn't flashy, nor a celebrity in the conventional sense. He was a craftsman, deeply respected by peers, critics, and audiences alike. Then came 1996. His performance as pianist David Helfgott in Shine stunned the world. Rush's raw, trembling portrayal of genius and madness won him the Academy Award for Best Actor, making him the first Australian male to achieve that honor. In the years that followed, his versatility astounded global audiences, from the conniving Sir Francis Walsingham in Elizabeth, to the tragic Lionel Logue in The King's Speech, to the swashbuckling Captain Barbossa in Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. He moved effortlessly between arthouse and blockbuster, theater and film. Rush wasn't just acting, he was building a legacy. By the early 2010s, Rush had become one of the most decorated actors in Australia's history. He had won an Oscar, an Emmy, a Tony, a BAFTA. In 2012, he was named Australian of the Year. And in 2014, he was appointed a Companion of the Order of Australia, one of the highest honors in the country. His name carried weight. His presence was revered. His voice, calm, articulate, and steeped in empathy, seemed untouchable. But prestige is brittle in the age of scandal. In 2017, the Sydney Theatre Company staged a production of King Lear, in which Rush played the titular role. The play, dense with madness, betrayal, and human disintegration, would become eerily prophetic. Months after the curtains closed, an anonymous complaint was lodged with the company, alleging inappropriate behavior by Rush during the production. No details were made public. No formal investigation was conducted. No legal action was taken. Still, the press pounced. On November 30th, 2017, the Daily Telegraph ran a front-page story with a screaming headline, "King Lear." The article suggested Rush had engaged in sexual misconduct, though it offered no facts, no names, only a cloud of insinuation. The damage was immediate. Projects were canceled, invitations dried up, the acting community turned cold. Geoffrey Rush, the man who once elevated every stage he touched, was suddenly radioactive. This was no longer about a role in King Lear. It became a story about power, public perception, and the uncontrollable fire of media scandal. The timeline aligned cruelly with the global eruption of Me Too. In Hollywood, titans were falling daily. Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, Louis C.K. The world was listening, believing, condemning, and often without due process. Rush, by contrast, was never arrested, never formally accused, never even questioned by police. But the court of public opinion does not require proof. The lines between truth, trauma, and reputation blurred. Australia watched in silence, unsure whether to defend its national treasure or distance from potential disgrace. Rush, a man known for restraint and dignity, remained quiet for months. When he finally spoke, it wasn't to deny the accusations, it was to sue the very newspaper that had published them. This section of his life, less known, rarely explored, is the crux of the story. Because while the allegations were vague, the consequences were not. What happens to an actor when the world treats hearsay as truth? What happens to a legacy when one anonymous voice is louder than a lifetime of work? The stage was set, not for a performance, but for a public reckoning. Geoffrey Rush's ascent to global acclaim was as unlikely as it was meteoric. Raised in a modest household in suburban Brisbane, he was never the child destined for glittering fame. Shy, bookish, and intellectually curious, Rush found refuge in literature and theater during his teenage years. His first exposure to acting came through university theater programs, and by the early 1970s, he had thrown himself completely into the stage. In 1975, he studied mime and movement in Paris under Jacques Lecoq, a training that would later inform his unique physicality on screen. Back in Australia, Rush became one of the founding faces of the Queensland Theatre Company, where he performed alongside other rising talents like Mel Gibson. Throughout the 1980s, his name became synonymous with theatrical excellence. Directors admired his precision. Critics revered his depth, but to the general public he remained largely unknown, an underground titan of the stage, quietly mastering his craft in a country not yet fully connected to global entertainment networks. Everything changed with Shine. The film, a harrowing portrait of real-life pianist David Helfgott, required Rush to disappear entirely into a man shattered by genius, trauma, and mental illness. He did it with terrifying accuracy. The world took notice. When he walked onto the stage at the Academy Awards in 1997 to collect his Oscar, it was not with the swagger of a star, but the humility of a lifelong student of performance. That moment ignited a new chapter. Suddenly, Hollywood wanted him. In the years that followed, Rush became an anomaly. An Australian actor celebrated not for his looks or glamour, but for his intellect, sensitivity, and control. He chose complex, often morally ambiguous characters. In Quills, he played the scandalous Marquise de Sade with magnetic depravity. In Shakespeare in Love, he added levity as the chaotic theater manager Philip Henslowe. In The Life and Death of Peter Sellers, he transformed into the mercurial comedian with such precision it earned him an Emmy. And then came Pirates of the Caribbean. As Captain Hector Barbassa, Rush brought Shakespearean menace to a Disney blockbuster, turning a cartoonish villain into something darkly operatic. The franchise catapulted him into the mainstream consciousness, but he never abandoned the stage. Between films, he returned home to Australia to perform in productions like Exit the King, The Diary of a Madman, and King Lear, the play that would later engulf him in scandal. At the peak of his career, Rush was not only working constantly, he was shaping the culture. He mentored young actors, advocated for the arts in Parliament, and became the inaugural president of the Australian Academy of Cinema and Television Arts, AATA. He was a national treasure, known for his integrity as much as his talent. But with visibility came scrutiny. The entertainment world was shifting. Movements demanding accountability were beginning to stir beneath the surface. In 2017, the dam broke. The first tremor came quietly. An unnamed actress from the King Lear production reportedly approached the Sydney Theatre Company with concerns about Rush's conduct during rehearsals. Her exact complaint has never been made public, but the theater, perhaps fearing reputational risk, noted the concern and informed journalists. The Daily Telegraph picked up the thread and ran with it. On November 30th, 2017, their now infamous headline, King Lear, appeared in bold, black type. Inside was a vaguely worded article suggesting Rush had behaved inappropriately toward a co-star, behavior the paper did not define, could not prove, and never corroborated. Nonetheless, it sent a shockwave through the industry. Almost overnight, Geoffrey Rush became a pariah. Producers pulled out of negotiations. The media swarmed. Anonymous comments circulated. He was dropped from campaigns and quietly removed from boards. Friends who once sought his advice now hesitated to be seen beside him. The man whose life had been built on character suddenly became a character in a scandalous narrative he could not control. Rush, devastated, released a statement denying all allegations, saying he had no idea what he had done wrong and was never made aware of any complaint during the production. But the machine had already started. Reputation once lost, even without proof, is nearly impossible to recover. The damage was done, not by a court, not by an official investigation, but by implication and the insatiable appetite for drama. Even as no formal charge was ever laid, the consequences rained down with merciless force. For an actor whose career was built on voice and presence, silence became his only defense. As the headlines spread and the public murmured, Geoffrey Rush found himself spiraling into isolation. His wife, actress Jane Menelis, stood by him, but the walls were closing in. He stopped attending public events. Calls from colleagues grew rare. Roles, once offered without audition, evaporated into nothing. Projects he had developed over years quietly collapsed. No formal charge had been filed, yet he was already serving a sentence: exile from an industry he had helped build. Behind closed doors, Rush struggled. In court documents later revealed during the lawsuit, he admitted to experiencing extreme distress and said the ordeal had triggered a permanent loss of trust in the media. He began to suffer from insomnia, anxiety, and episodes of deep depression. At one point, he told his lawyer he felt his reputation was irreparably damaged, and that he was ashamed to show his face in public. But the deeper truth, one rarely acknowledged in scandals like this, is that Rush did not remain silent out of guilt. He remained silent because he believed the only way to preserve his dignity was to let the truth emerge through legal process, not tabloid warfare. So in December 2017, just weeks after the damaging articles were published, he sued the Telegraph's publisher for defamation. It was a bold move. Few in the entertainment industry, especially during the volatile Me Too era, dared to challenge public perception so directly. But Rush was determined. The case unfolded over the next 2 years in the Federal Court of Australia, and it became one of the most scrutinized media trials in the country's history. The trial exposed everything. The anonymous accuser was revealed to be actress Erin Jean Norville, Rush's co-star in King Lear. In court, she claimed Rush had made inappropriate gestures and comments during rehearsals. But under cross-examination, inconsistencies in her account were exposed. Other cast members testified that they saw no such behavior. Crucially, Norville had never filed a complaint with police or made her concerns known formally before the article was published. Justice Michael Wigney, in his final judgment, condemned the Telegraph's reporting in the strongest terms. He said the newspaper failed to verify facts, published sensationalist claims without sufficient evidence, and ultimately acted with reckless indifference to the truth. The judge described Norville's testimony as unreliable and inconsistent, and stated that the articles portrayed Rush in a sensational and unfair manner. Rush won. He was awarded nearly $2.9 million AED in damages, a record for a defamation case in Australia. The victory was emphatic. The judge's words, delivered in dry legal tone, were a vindication of everything Rush had claimed, that he had been smeared, unjustly shamed, and cast into the wilderness without cause. But the truth, no matter how clear in court, doesn't always repair the damage outside it. The media backlash after the trial was mixed. Some applauded the verdict as a rare moment of accountability for reckless journalism. Others viewed it as a chilling effect on future victims speaking out. The public remained divided. Rush had cleared his name legally, but socially, the stain lingered. The entertainment industry did not rush to welcome him back. He has not starred in a major project since. For many, the damage was already done. Even worse was the emotional toll. In an interview following the verdict, a close friend of Rush revealed he had withdrawn from creative life almost entirely, describing him as a man who walks like a ghost now, vindicated but vanished. In a poignant moment during the trial, Rush admitted under oath, "I have spent 50 years trying to build a life and career on trust, humility, and care, and all of that can be erased by a headline." That is perhaps the most disturbing truth of all, not whether Rush was guilty or innocent, but how easily a life's work can be reduced to a whisper of suspicion. no matter the verdict, the scars remain. In the end, the court affirmed what Rush had always maintained. There was no misconduct, no evidence, and no justification for the storm that followed. But he had already paid the price, the kind of price no sum of money can restore. Geoffrey Rush's story isn't simply one of fame tainted by scandal. It's a story of how modern culture, driven by clicks, outrage, and the court of public opinion, can weaponize suspicion, and how even truth, when revealed too late, becomes powerless against perception. At Aussie Uncovered, we believe Rush's case is one of the most harrowing cautionary tales in Australian entertainment history. Not because it involved unspeakable acts, nor because of any undeniable guilt, but because it represents the destructive force of ambiguity left unchecked. He was never formally accused by the police. No legal process found him guilty of anything. And yet, his career was annihilated almost overnight. Rush was not a perfect man. No one in the public eye is. But to witness the brutal swiftness with which decades of artistry were erased by a vague, unproven claim is deeply unsettling. It forces us to ask, have we built a world where reputation is disposable? Where a legacy, however monumental, can be shattered not by what is proven, but by what is whispered? The media has a role to investigate, to speak truth to power. But in Rush's case, the Daily Telegraph overstepped. The court's judgment was not merely legal, it was moral. They had destroyed a man based on rumor, and the cost was incalculable. Even if Rush received a financial settlement, his absence from the screen, from the stage, from the cultural life of Australia, is a loss that can't be quantified. There's also something quietly tragic in the industry's response, or lack thereof. After the verdict, very few voices stood up to publicly support Rush. Colleagues who had once praised his brilliance remained silent. Production companies kept their distance. There was no major statement from national arts institutions, no campaign to reintegrate him into the scene. It's as if the damage was not just done, it was accepted. And yet, despite everything, Rush never retaliated with bitterness. His court testimony was not about vengeance, but about the need for fairness and truth. He never attacked his accuser personally. He never lashed out at the industry. He faded away with dignity, but the silence that followed spoke volumes. At Aussie Uncovered, we also see Rush's ordeal as emblematic of a larger cultural reckoning. The challenge of how to balance justice for victims with fairness for the accused. In an era where stories move faster than facts, and where platforms reward the sensational over the accurate, the Geoffrey Rush case asks us to look deeper, to pause, and to consider the human cost of getting it wrong. We do not claim to know every truth behind every closed door, but in Rush's case, the truth was put under legal scrutiny and emerged intact. And that should matter. It should mean something. So what do you think? Should a cleared name mean full redemption? Can an artist recover once public perception turns against them, even if that perception was built on lies? Or are we now living in a time where clearing your name is no longer enough? Tell us what you believe. There was a time when Geoffrey Rush's name would light up a marquee, when his presence alone could elevate a production from promising to unforgettable. He wasn't just a performer, he was a master craftsman, weaving emotion, intellect, and precision into every role he touched. From trembling genius in Shine, to the haunted stammer of The King's Speech, to the theatrical villainy of Pirates of the Caribbean, Rush gave the world characters that lingered long after the curtains fell. Now, there is only silence, no fanfare, no comeback, no grand return to the stage he once commanded. The applause has faded, not because of failure or scandal proven, but because the world moved on without asking the harder questions. It is easier, perhaps, to forget than to confront what was lost. But for those who remember, Rush's disappearance is not just a personal tragedy. It's a reflection of how fragile legacy can be in an age that devours its icons and leaves no room for nuance. Geoffrey Rush once said, "Acting is the ability to live truthfully under imaginary circumstances." But nothing about what happened to him was imaginary. It was real. It was raw. And it left a scar, not just on him, but on the conscience of an entire industry. Some stories are never told, but now you know. Perhaps one day, the lights will rise again on a stage where Rush reclaims what was taken, not as a symbol of scandal, but as a survivor of silence. Until then, his absence remains a quiet echo in the halls of Australian culture, a ghost of greatness that once stood tall and may never rise again. And yet, for those who watched him become David Helfgott, or speak to kings, or command a cursed ship across cinematic seas, the memory remains vivid, untouchable, unshakable. Legends don't vanish, they wait.